on YouTube.
Craig Thornley, it is an absolute pleasure to have you on the Singletrack Podcast. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me, Finn.
First question, and I'm not sure you've ever been asked this on a podcast. Maybe you haven't. I didn't do my homework, but what is the story behind the name Lord Balls that you go by on social media?
Actually, it has been discussed. When I first got this job, the Auburn Journal contacted me, and they were a little bit hesitant to ask me, why is your Twitter handle Lord Balls? They were expecting some perverse meaning, which would not be out of character with my personality and who I am, but it's actually not a perverse meaning at all. My step grandmother was in her final years or final weeks of life, and she had moved to Auburn. My parents lived in Cool, and she moved into a home in Auburn. And I didn't know her that well, but she came to Western States, to Forest Hill in 2004. And I was racing top 10, trying to get in top 10. And I ended up puking right after the aid station. I ate all this food, and I didn't even see her at Forest Hill. So I go see her in her home on Monday, and she says, you ran by like you were Lord Balls or something. And I had no idea what that meant, but I looked it up, and it meant someone who thinks very highly of themselves.
Wow.
I thought, oh boy, that's kind of appropriate for me. And she died not long after that, and so I took the name. That's where it came from.
Wow, that's actually a great story. That's awesome.
How about the namesake behind your famous blog, Conduct the Juices? Where does that come from?
That one I probably haven't talked about on a podcast. I used to have a climbing gym in my garage in Eugene, and someone brought a sticker that it had, I don't know even what company it was, but it was Conduct the Juices. And in the climbing gym, it just, I interpret it as, this is, let's work hard. Let's train hard. And then I started writing a newsletter piece for Willamette Pass Ski Patrol, which I was the director of, and I called it Conduct the Juices. And it could mean, your motivation, your mojo, whatever you want it to be. It could also have a perverse meaning, which obviously in the gym setting, there was a lot of references to perverse meanings. And then I ended up writing a blog with the same name. And so that's where that came from, Conduct the Juices.
Well, we probably read about 40 or 50 of those posts in prep for this episode. It's an excellent blog. We'll link to it in the show notes. I wish it was still, it's still there. You can go back in history and see some of the great stuff you put pen to paper about. But talking about that blog for a moment, one of your last posts you made was about this synchro blog project. We actually had Scott Dunlap on the show maybe a year ago to reminisce about that. But you did this synchro blog project with other content creators in the sport at the time. And in one instance, you all wrote hypothetical letters to Western states requesting certain changes. And I thought that was super cool. And I guess the question here is, if you were to reboot that project today, what would be the organizing theme and why?
Well, we brought it back. It was a fantastic few years of doing synchro blogs. The very first one was really awesome. That's when I wrote directly to the board of directors about the mandatory volunteer requirement. And it sure got everybody's attention because we had, I think it was 5 of us, maybe 4 of us. And, every post had links to the other blogs. So we shared our permalinks with each other before we published. And when we published, you don't know how people came into this circle of blogs, but you read every post, or at least you had links to every post. And it was, I definitely got the attention of the board. We brought it back a few years ago. We tried it again, but I think the blogosphere just kind of, it's just passe now. It's not really, podcasts, what you guys are doing right now is what seems to be the space now. If we did it again, there's so much to talk about with UTMB and the Spartan World Series and just the way the sport has become more professional, I guess. The front end of the field is definitely a lot different. So there would be plenty of stuff to talk about there. But then you look at like Caleb Efta from High Lonesome, and there's all kinds of social issues, and there would be plenty of stuff to talk about. And if I did another Schenkel blog, I'd want Caleb on to be one of those bloggers. I think he would bring an interesting perspective to the mix.
Would you bring back any of the veterans?
Well, AJW would cry if I didn't bring him back. So, and we're not going to deploy the crying tent this year for AJW. So he was fun. I don't know who else we do today. Yeah, we'd probably bring back some of the veterans, but I want some edgier voices.
One more question on this front, because you actually wrote a post about this. It was one of the last posts. You kind of lamented the fact that blogs were going by the wayside. They were no longer this popular medium in the ultra running community, and you kind of lamented the fact that it's getting increasingly difficult to have these community-wide discussions about important issues. The forums aren't there, the blogs aren't there. Maybe podcasts are it, but have you thought at all about this, about like what the next evolution is there in the space, and if we are having these types of conversations in a public way that you'd like to see?
I don't know what that medium is, but the podcasts are definitely how people are consuming a lot of content, but it doesn't necessarily lend itself to a bigger group conversation. Maybe if you do it on YouTube Live, like we're doing right now, and we have interactive chat. But you still need time. People need time to think of their answers, and it's pretty hard to do it on the spot in a live interview to really get someone's opinions, because some people don't think on their toes that quickly, and they need time. I don't know what that future medium would be. Blogs were fantastic. Oh my God, they were fantastic. And the fact that you could, in many of them, you could be anonymous. Sometimes that works against you as a blog publisher. Sometimes you don't want people to comment anonymously, but you could always see their IP addresses. So you could generally, unless they were really savvy, you could figure out where they came from, probably who they were. Even if they were in a coffee shop in Ashland, Oregon or something, you could generally figure out who they were. But that added a pretty interesting dynamic to it. And I used to pick on AJW on his blog as an anonymous Oregonian. We piled up on him. But you could also be yourself and give serious answers. And it was a good mix of, you could be irreverent and poke fun at each other and at the sport. And you can have really serious discussions back and forth. And I don't know if podcasts are necessarily have that same kind of back and forth with a large group of people. What do you think it's going to be? What do you think it should be?
I guess one thing I've really been liking no knock on us doing this interview remotely, but being all in the same room is something that I feel like has gone away with the ability to go remote. I mean, this is huge because, you've got such a busy week coming up. So like, I would much rather have this than nothing by far, but something about that, like the personal connection that you get from actually being in the same room, being able to like slug you in the shoulder or something.
Yeah, we just had Courtney DeWalter here and Dakota Jones here to, debrief their prep for Western States. And there was an energy in the room that I've missed since, pre-COVID, that I think draws some more authenticity out. But there is something to be said about long form content and being able to like sit in a room for however long it takes to put out a blog post and really think through something. And again, to respond in those forums. So
one medium that actually has been really fun to kind of be a part of, the first half of this year is in some of the live broadcasts that we've gotten to be a part of, like at Bandera, Black Canyon, and Cocodona, interacting with the YouTube live chat and the actual fans. Like while we're commentating on the race, so many people are able to just chime in, what they know about some of the runners or any insight info. And like, we're able to read it and actively have a conversation back with them. And that's something that I feel like is somewhat unique to our sport. Because like, you don't see like Troy Aikman popping up on Twitter midway through like Monday Night Football being like, oh yeah, so-and-so did bring up a good point. But having that, I think is one of, it's so fun to be able to interact with more fans of the sport in that way. And I feel like it's really grown, or it's helping grow the like overall viewership of the sport, outside of your post race recap or being there in person. It's adding like a different element that makes watching a pretty long race. I mean, you're tuning into Western States, even if you just watch from the start to when the first person that crosses the finish line, it's 15 hours. Having more things to do over the course of that 15-hour broadcast has brought a really fun element to the sport.
Yeah, when we started our live broadcast 3 years ago, we had discussed syndicating it across multiple platforms. And UTMB even asked us, why don't you have this on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube? And Billy Yang, who was our director and producer of our live broadcast, he said, let's do it all on YouTube so that we can have that interaction, that live chat. And I don't get to watch much of it because I'm directing the race, but I think they've experienced exactly what you're talking about. These longer people are joined in this 15 hours or 30 hours talking about the same thing. And it does give people time to think about their responses or their answers. It doesn't have to be immediate. Yeah.
Craig, one thing I'm curious about, Western States is obviously, it's the most popular ultra marathon, at least in the US, but internationally it's getting there. Why are you obsessed with this race? Why did you decide to make it such a significant part of your life's work? I guess you could extend the question to race directing in general, but why has this race had such a pull on you and it's made you want to invest so much of your energy into it?
Well, as a youngster, when I accidentally discovered myself at mile 83 of this 100-mile race, I was definitely mesmerized by what the runners were going through. That attracted me immediately, but that's just 100 miles in general, I think. And then I started working at Dusty Corners, working at a couple other places, and that community of each little community, small community of aid station volunteers. I mean, it was like we hadn't been apart for a year. We were brought together each year, and that camaraderie, that family feel, I was definitely drawn by that. The course, the trail, I'm just totally fascinated with the course. I just spent 2 days working in the high country. We went from Lion Ridge Aid Station all the way to Duncan Canyon Aid Station, cutting trees off in Whitethorn. And we talked about the diversity of the course. And Western States goes from the high country, which looks completely different than the canyon section, and the canyons is completely different after you leave Forest Hill and you come into the lower elevation stuff. They're just completely different ecosystems. That's the right term. And a lot of races don't have that. It requires a point-to-point or some way to go through all these ecosystems, and point-to-point hundreds are really hard to put on. I can see why there's not more of them. There's so many obstacles. Usually land use itself, or the permitting. Can you go across 100 miles without wilderness areas or private land? It's pretty hard to find that. And then just logistically, it's much more challenging to have 20 aid stations than to have 5 aid stations that you visit 4 times. That really makes Western States special. And then you feel the history in the gold country, in the middle part of the course, the canyons, all the mines. You can really, I don't know, even though it's only 180 something years, it's not, I don't know, it's pretty fascinating to me. And you could just feel and imagine what the miners were going through as they were walking up to Michigan Bluff to get their whiskey and a hooker or something, whatever they were doing in Michigan Bluff. It's palpable. You can feel it. You see how old the trail is. The trail in the canyons was built as a toll trail, and it wasn't engineered. It was just built, and it's so hard to maintain that. That's why you have some of the berms are 3 feet high. The water just goes straight down the trail because it was never engineered the way a modern trail is built. But that gives it character. That gives it something that, wow, this is not a trail that was built in the last 20 years. This was built 170, 180 years ago, and that's pretty special. And then the fact that there have been so many people on this course before you. As a runner, you go by, you run up Devil's Thumb just like Jim King ran up it, just like Mark Brotherton ran up it, just like Ann Trayson ran up it 14 times in the race. And you feel that too. I think that's pretty powerful. So yeah, those are some of the reasons. And I absolutely love being a race director. I'm a connector that, I really love bringing communities together and getting people working towards the same goal. And when it actually happens, it's at times it's surreal and humbling. Like this year, especially with all the challenges we've had with the fire and the private landowners, and then the roads getting washed out, and just all kinds of challenges, and getting everybody moving in the same direction it's really, really satisfying for me, and humbling at times too. Like, wow, all these people are moving in the same direction, and I'm at the top of it. I really like that.
Yeah, it seems like it's very fluid in terms of, Western states, from year to year even. And I think that's probably something that a lot of people don't realize looking at it from the outside. But one question I did think of while you're talking about, the course and, how it would the trail would probably look very different if it were built, 20 years ago. Do you see, Western states as a race course? Do you think it will evolve or change much more than it is right now? I guess what I was thinking about was in the last few years, like the Browns Bar aid station moved just a little bit. The quarry or the Highway 49 aid station moved a little bit. Does the current, the current list of aid stations, does that seem like a pretty finalized spot, or do you think that will continue to shift and move around as Western states, continues to run for more and more years?
Well, when Western States was, in its infancy, you carried Aunt Jemima hand bottles with tape around them as your handhelds, right? Didn't have the same fluid capacity. And one of the strategies of the early organizers of Western States is whenever they'd have someone go off course, they would put an aid station there so you couldn't get off course. So we just had way too many aid stations compared to what we have now. I don't know what UTMB
has. There was more than there are now.
Oh, there were a lot more. Yeah, I think the high was 30 aid stations. We're at 20.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we've been trying to get more in line with the sport as it changes, as the hydration packs can hold a lot more than 2 handheld Aunt Jemima water bottles. And do I think it's done? There are a couple places that we could squeeze a couple more out, but at this point, I'm not looking to make any changes right now. And those changes that you just referenced, those were just shifts.
Yeah.
You worked with Hal at Browns Bar.
Yeah.
That access was through private land, Auburn Lake Trails, and it was a challenge every year to, one, get the 2 gates opened, and then to have the road to be in a condition that you could drive down it. So we moved it down to the Quarry Road. We just have one ASRA gate, Auburn State Recreation Area gate. It's really easy to get to. Highway 49 we moved because it was a really dangerous location. We had crews that would get off the buses in the middle of the night, and they'd have to walk across the street, the Highway 49. And I think it was just a matter of time before there was a serious incident. We had drunk drivers that CHP, who manned the station, would go and arrest, but it's dangerous. It was dangerous. So we moved that to Pointed Rocks, and then that kind of made it like, why do we have No Hands Bridge, which is just a couple miles downhill. You don't really need another aid station there. So that shifting, those two shifts, is why we eliminated No Hands Bridge. Wasn't that it was a bad aid station; it just didn't seem to be necessary. Mm-hmm. If we have other issues that we need to address, yeah, we'll listen to them. We'll adapt, but there's nothing in the immediate. I'm not spending any time right now thinking about where I'm going to take out the station for movement.
Craig, you mentioned Caleb after we've had Caleb on the pod to talk about this. Same with the Palettes. We recently had Doug Mayer on, who wrote a book on UTMB talking about this subject. I've always been curious about this from your perspective, because Western States has been at the forefront of a lot of interesting and positive change in the sport. What do you see, especially within the board, to the extent that you can be public about this, what do you see as the biggest tensions inside of Western States right now when it comes to like preservation versus innovation in any area? Like, as fans of the sport, what should we be paying attention to in that arena?
Well, what we struggle with, or what we try to resolve all the time, is this increase in sponsorship dollars and exposure versus keeping it the way it used to be. Our sponsorship dollars are, I think, triple, maybe a little more than triple when I came on. And we've been able to keep the entry fee at the same price for many years. We've added drug testing, we've added live broadcast. Neither of those are cheap. And we've been able to do it without raising the entry fee. And that's primarily because we've had increase in sponsorship dollars. But with that comes an expectation from the sponsors. Like, we put Hoka banners across No Hands Bridge, and we have to resolve: is it how much more of the sponsorship do we want to bring in, where we can make the race better, versus keeping it the way it used to be. So that's probably the most tangible tension that we have to resolve all the time. And I'm thinking about that on almost a daily basis.
I mean, I think another question I have, and this probably routes back to what we just discussed, but you're always, in addition to thinking about how to move the race forward or keep it sustainable, at the end of the day, it probably does come back to the runners and creating a great experience for them. I don't know if the answer to this is obvious, and it could just be that the answer is all trail runners, but who do you try to attract in terms of like your ideal runner for this race? Like, in business, there's the term ideal customer profile. Is there like a type of runner that you're trying to attract to this race?
Sub 14 hours.
Not necessarily a specific runner, but we obviously want people who are qualified and prepared to run all 100 miles to Auburn, increasing the qualifying standards a few years ago, like we did, from 50 miles to 100K or 100 miles. If you look at the finishing percentages since we did that, I think it in addition to making it a little bit harder to get into the race, which runners just did whatever they had to do to get qualified, but I think it also makes we have a more prepared field. And I don't care if someone runs 30 hours or 14 hours. If they're ready to run this race and they're gonna give it their all, and I'm all for that. I don't care how fast they are.
Are you seeing, as you're watching the sport evolve, are you noticing that runners are more or less prepared for this race, or about the same? Like, is technology and education and training evolving to a point where a lot of the worries that may have been at the forefront 10 years ago, they're waning? Or how do you think about that?
They're definitely more prepared. I don't know if it's because it takes people 8 years of running 100Ks or 100 milers before they get into Western States, or is it because of technology changing or information's available? There's been information available for quite some time, but yeah, they're definitely more prepared. And I don't know if that's the same across the board. Canyon's 100 miler that just happened in Auburn last month, 45% finish rate. I mean, that's pretty abysmal.
Yeah.
That's that's abysmal. Is that a reflection on the whole sport, or is that a reflection of the fact that it's pretty easy to get in that race? You could have signed up the day before or whatever, so there wasn't as much pull to get to the finish line, or not as much drive. Whereas if you get into Western States and it took you 8 years, you're going to be pretty damn motivated to get to the finish line. So I don't know if I can project what's happening at Western States onto the rest of the sport, but people are definitely more prepared, and there's so much information out there.
Yeah, and I guess speaking of like preparedness for, I guess looking a little bit into this year, I know there's always been jokes about like the good weather years versus the hot weather years of like whether Western States ends up, in the red or in the black because the amount of silver buckles that they have to hand out. This is looking like it might actually end up being a lot of silver buckles type year. Do you think that'll still be the case even with, how difficult it looks like the conditions still are up in the high country?
Yeah, I think if we put heat onto this year, we would have been looking at a low silver rate and probably a lower finish rate overall. But with low 80s, and maybe 34 degrees at the start, heat is not going to be a factor. Although 80 degrees can still feel hot to someone who's not used to running in that. Not to totally discount the heat. 80 degrees in the sun is still hot. And going through the burn areas where there's not as much shade as there used to be, I think that's going to make it feel hotter to many people, depending on where you are in the pack when you get into those conditions. But yeah, a benign weather year like 2012, runners will benefit from the cooler weather. Absolutely. And we joke about the cost of the silver buckles. We don't. We will come up with the money. It's not we're not going to be scrounging for money if we give out more silver buckles.
Oh, sorry, you just get a silver painted buckle.
Craig, I'd love for you to talk a bit about what it took to get the race ready for this coming Saturday. I know there were a lot of people on social media publicly saying, this race either shouldn't happen this year for various reasons. They were kind of like looking at the forecast and how much snow we got, et cetera, and saying either shouldn't happen or it's not going to happen. And I did listen to your episode with Dylan on Free Trail, and you talked about how you just had this mindset from the very beginning when all this stuff started to occur that it was going to happen. You were going to get the start of this race to the finish line. So for any people that haven't listened to that episode or are just curious about any other things that have happened since the recording of that, what did it take this year versus other years?
Well, first, we're still not done. We have a team up in Granite Chief with crosscut saws logging out the first 10 miles of the course. So we're not completely done, and we're probably going to have some work coming up in the next 3 days. We're probably going to install some fixed lines and have to cut some steps into some of the snow near Cougar Rock, which is pretty treacherous. But back in September when the mosquito fire started, that's what we thought was going to be our biggest challenge of the year is, wow, we have 16 miles of the course that are burned. And at the time, we were able to just focus on those 16 miles, that being the biggest challenge. And yeah, we just went in with the attitude of, we went to the Forest Service instead of asking them, when are we going to be able to use the trail again? Which if you let them tell you, they got lots of other stuff to do. They got roads that got washed out they have to repair. They have other trails and campgrounds and whatnot. It's probably not going to be the answer you want. So we went there with the attitude of what can we do to help get this trail ready? And we had that mindset from day one. And fortunately, we had receptive partners in the agency, specifically the Forest Service. And we came up with creative solutions on how to get the trail ready. It included paying the Forest Service money to keep their seasonal employees on so they could work in November and December. And then we hired a contractor from Northern California to supplement their labor and then the volunteer effort, which I think we're now approaching 3,000 hours of volunteer effort. So we just had that. We had that mindset from day one, and it's turned out to be it worked. It's been a little bit harder now that the snow came, and the snow is not really releasing its grip, but it's beginning to release its grip on the trail. We just got into Red Star Ridge Aid Station Saturday for the first time, and then Lion Ridge Aid Station. We got a cat or a D6 that's finishing up the work today to get into that first aid station. So the snow and the water, the water, 60 inches of rain fell on the burn scar on Forest Hill. That caused a lot of damage to roads, to other outside of the trail. But it's been an incredible effort, and I'm almost ready to celebrate it yet. But I just got a call from the guys up in Granite Chief just a couple hours ago. They're up there right now, and it's been a tremendous effort. It's pretty awesome. This last weekend we had our annual camp out, which is their last weekend before the race. We can do any last minute needs. And it's also a time to celebrate the year of trail work. And it was absolutely awesome. We got so much work done. We had 4 different teams on Saturday. I think it was 40 volunteers. We had 4 different teams. So we were all over the place doing different jobs. And people who never had done trail work before had joined us, and some had done a lot of trail work with us this year. So it was a mix. We even had Jim Howard out there, who won the race in 1983. He came out and did trail work with us this weekend. It was pretty cool. It's been a tremendous effort. And we're really proud to present the normal course to the runners this year along the ridge tops, which is what you want to see when you run Western States. You don't want to run down on gravel roads next to French Meadows Reservoir. So we're really proud to be able to offer the normal course to runners this year.
This is something we often ask of a lot of runners that have been in the sport for a while, especially if they've accomplished a lot or they've just had a long career, and we're curious about why they're still in it. They're still in the trenches, training hard, racing hard, etc. And I kind of want to point this question to you as a race director. It's 2 parts. One, are you still as excited about the sport and about race directing as you were, dating back to when you got involved with Waldo or Western States? And then B, what still keeps you going right now? Like, why are you still interested in it in 2023?
I am absolutely, totally the same interest, maybe even more so as the sport gets bigger and the race becomes more high profile. I love the pressure. I feel it. I know there's a lot of critics out there, and I feel it, and I thrive on that, actually. I'm still at times. I'm getting a little tired as I'm approaching retirement age. I'm getting at times I think, this would be nice to just go use my chainsaw and cut logs off the trail instead of having to do all the other stuff that's involved in directing the race. But some of the mundane, the minutia, I'm a little bit tired of that. We did just hire an administrative assistant, and she has already been a tremendous help on my workload in the areas that I've just described. That's been a big help, and I think if she continues to take more of that load, I can see myself going for more years. But the race has grown. There's been mission creep, as Tim Tweetmeyer warned me when I interviewed in 2012. Said, watch out for mission creep. And this job is way more involved than it was 10 years ago. But I think we're at an interesting point in the sport, and I don't want to stop right now. And I think there's still innovations and changes that are coming up that I want to be a part of. So I'm struggling with that. Am I tired? Am I going to retire, or do I want to stay on? And right now, I still want to stay on.
I think there's a lot of questions I want to ask you around the blog. I feel like we could dedicate a whole episode to analyzing some of the posts that you made over the years. But one thing that struck me, and I'm relatively new to the sport, I got into this in 2016. So I'm in the ultra running equivalent of like 7th grade right now. I'm still learning so much. And one of the things that struck me about your blog is a lot of the issues that we're debating today, we were debating in a lot of the same ways back in 2009, 2010, 2011. It's not like from an intellectual standpoint, we're really reinventing the wheel here or anything. You guys were on it back then as well. Are there any issues that you feel like have been resolved since those blog days? You know, if you had like an interesting topic that you were trying to deconstruct, you felt like we've kind of settled that issue, or is everything still an open question at this point?
When you tweeted out, Finn, a couple months ago, it was, I forget exactly what the tweet was, but you asked a question. You did it very well, but you asked the question: is it the race's responsibilities to help the professional runners make a living? Right. That's the exact same thing we were dealing with 12 years ago, and my position hasn't really changed, and I don't think the sport has resolved itself, but brands have come on and sponsored athletes are giving them bigger contracts. And I don't think races have necessarily come out with prize money to support the lives of the professional runners, but they are definitely able to make more money. You get a course record at Western States, you're probably going to get a pretty big bonus from your sponsor. And that probably wasn't the case 12, 13 years ago when we were resolving that. But I had that exact same question from Jeff Rose, used to be one of those runners who thought that it was our responsibility to provide their livelihood. And I never thought it was our responsibility. I thought you need to be creative and be better at marketing yourself and figure out how to make a living at this. And so maybe some of that has been resolved because people are making a living at it now, and it's not the race's responsibility, or I've never thought it was race's responsibility, but we provide the opportunity for them to race against the best people in the sport. And if they perform well, then money flows to them from some other sources, but not necessarily from the race.
Yeah, I mean,
and that post you were talking about, the fast dude, I had to reread that.
Fast dude versus RD. Oh, we'll link to it in the show notes. So good. So good. For anyone that's not familiar, tell the listeners and the viewers about the context of that post.
Well, I was conflating a lot. I brought in a lot of perspective. So it wasn't just me as the race director in the fast dude, but it was a runner who thought they were deserving, because of their speed, they were deserving of a spot in a race that had a lottery. And the race director is going back to the runner saying, we have a lot of people in our race. Have you considered volunteering or helping the race in some other way? And the fast dude just kept saying, no, you don't get it. I'm fast. You need to let me in the race. I deserve to be in the race. And the race director says, oh, well, our race is, we have scholarships out to underprivileged kids, and we do all these good things. And the fast dude is just so obsessed with, hey, I'm fast. I need to be in your race. You need to let me in your race. And the RD kind of gets a little short with the fast dude at the end. It ends a little edgy. I'd forgotten that, but it was just that dialogue. And I don't necessarily see that now to the same level. One of the things I really like about this new UTMB model, which for many people is still really confusing, is that you race your way in, just like our golden ticket series, right? If you're a fast person, we have an avenue for you to get into the race. Go race against the people in that qualifying event and show us that you're worthy of a spot, instead of just subjectively saying, well, I'm fast, you need to give me a spot in the race. And I really like that about the UTMB, even though it meant Jim Walmsley had to run a qualifying 100-miler to get into UTMB. But I like that. I just, here you go. Here, objectively, go show us what you can do.
I don't know the answer here. I'm truly a noob question, but how does the selection process for golden tickets work? Like when you factor in all of the different people that have seats at the table for selecting and deselecting races? Because it changes, it seems like, year after year too. So for myself, anyone else in the audience that's curious, how does that process work?
Yeah, it's actually gotten a little bit more complicated than it had in the past because of our affiliation with the UTMB World Series. So they have a say in some of them. Hoka, our presenting sponsor, has a say, and then there's 3 of us on the board: me, Dylan, and Topher. I'm not on the board, but Dylan and Topher from the board, and myself, and we go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, decide what we're going to do. We have contractually with UTMB, we have a certain number of races that need to be by UTMB races. And we try to do geographic distribution of the races. When we were part of the Ultra Trail World Tour, which dissolved right before UTMB World Series came about, we used to get our international field through that. We'd get 6 athletes from overseas through that avenue. Well, that went away to us. So we pushed those spots into international golden ticket races. And we really want an international field. I don't think you can have the best field in the world unless you have runners from all over the world. So that's why you're seeing more international races. That was a direct result of losing those UTWT spots. But this series, we're also looking at the race coverage of those golden ticket races. And I mean, Jamil Curry and Aravaipa, we get people say, why does Aravaipa have 2 golden ticket races? Well, look at their races. Look at what they do.
It's a great product.
Not only do they attract incredible fields, but they promote it and they have the live broadcast, and they've been pushing the way in the live broadcast. So yeah, we're gonna gravitate towards those types of races to be a golden race.
Yeah, I mean, I guess backtracking just a bit, talking about like the back and forth, whether, it's up to the races to, support the athletes if they win. It always seemed like that didn't make a ton of sense looking at Western States specifically being a non-profit race. Like if Western States isn't putting on the race to put on a profit, like why are the runners profiting off the non-profit race? But I guess, I thought that came off of that was just like, what are, that a non-profit operation like that works a little bit differently than, like a for-profit company. What are some things that you get to do differently, whether it's, I guess, good or bad, as Western States?
So here's a quick anecdote. Andrew Messick from Ironman was visiting us with the Palettes when they were going around the United States looking for races to buy to be part of the UTMB World Series. And we finished, and it was during the pandemic, so we ate outside on my deck in December. It was really cold. We came in afterwards, and I showed him a buckle. I had a silver buckle on the table, and I said, "Yeah, here's the finisher buckle." And he looks at it, and he's touching it. He said, "How much does this cost?" And I said, "I think it's about $435." And he said, "And what's the entry fee?" I said, $410. And he said, "How does that work?" His for-profit mentality he couldn't wrap his head around that. There's one thing that we're allowed to do. I'm not trying to make a profit for any shareholders. We're not beholden to having to make a profit. But I thought that was an interesting anecdote. But we can also do we can do a lot more fundraising. Because we're nonprofit, we can go after grants that you can't get as a for-profit race, and the way we are treated by other, not necessarily vendors. Vendors aren't, our toilet company isn't cutting us a break, but municipalities and other organizations that we work with treat us a little bit differently because we're nonprofit. And I like that. I don't know if I could go back to a for-profit world right now. I really like being involved in a nonprofit that does good stuff.
Well, Craig, I think wrapping up this conversation, I just wanted to express my appreciation for how much you've been in the arena in the sport for so long, and how many, in addition to just the race directing, how many interesting ideas you've injected into the space. I know just reading your blog in recent weeks and months, it's been influential on me, and we're excited to be fans of this race on Saturday. Are there any public service announcements that might be worthwhile making on this show before we go? Like, is there anything that's new this year, or things you're excited about, or for folks that are coming in Wednesday, Thursday, Friday that they should be aware of?
Well, first off, thank you. I don't necessarily I'm not on social media advocating all my new ideas. I don't have the blog anymore. I have a very influential position here, but it doesn't feel like I'm as public with my ideas. So the fact that you read those from 10 years ago is kind of interesting, because I did have I was in people's faces. It was hard to hide. But for this race, what's going to be challenging for our organization is the fact that Mosquito Ridge Road, which is how we access the aid stations on the south side of the course, that is closed. It's not in a passable condition. So there's no crews at Dusty Corners and Duncan Canyon, and that means Robinson Flat is going to be slammed. And we've been debating whether we should restrict crew vehicles to one per runner and have a pass in the vehicle. And I have been against that, because I think people will do the right thing when we ask them to just bring one car per runner, one crew car, pack your people in. That's the way we're going. So I just want to make sure that runners, crews respect that and understand how much pressure is going to be on getting their crews up to Robinson Flat, and then I would hope they would work cooperatively and help each other out, and only bring one, not 3 crew vehicles. Please don't do that. Once we get past that, it should be normal, but that's going to be a pressure point for us.
Brett, any final questions or thoughts?
We got to let Craig bank some sleep or something. I know it's going to be a wild weekend, and probably a few days leading up to it. So, I'm excited to follow along. Never followed the race from a media side of things before. It's going to be an awesome year, and I guess we'll see you at the finish line.
Craig, we always give the guest the final word. Any final thoughts from you before we go?
I hope every runner's dreams come true. I know some people waited a long time to get into this race, and I hope they can just be present with every moment from the start to the finish, and all the pre-race hype stuff. Just absorb it all. Don't just rush it and try to get through it. It's definitely potentially a life-changing day for many people, and stay present.
All right, we're